and there's intimacy on the radio, and there's naturalness on the radio that can never be replicated on TV. The marvelous resurgence of radio as a political force in this country.
News-related radio programming is evolving.
There's a huge hole in our dialogue that can be filled by the synthesis of traditional radio and the freedom that comes from a live podcast. You're about to experience Cowboy State Politics live. Here we go. Good morning, my friends, and welcome to another fantastic installment from very high above all the puerile, bombastic twits in the Wyoming mainstream media. This is Cowboy State Politics. I, of course, am your illustrious host, David Iverson, firmly ensconced behind the silver Cowboy State Politics microphone and broadcasting to you from the base of the Bighorns at the Cowboy State Politics studio in Sheridan, Wyoming. Good morning, my friends, and welcome to the program. Happy Thursday, and a very exciting day on the program indeed. We begin this morning with a little bit of self-aggrandizement. I don't, personally, I don't do that all that often, or at least I try not to. But there are some very wise people who have said that if you don't toot your own horn, nobody else is going to do it for you. And I mentioned this yesterday on the podcast, and I kind of made a big deal about it, but yesterday, the Cowboy State Politics podcast achieved 350,000 downloads. That's the first time that a podcast in Wyoming has done that, and it is an extraordinary number, my friends. Every time I talk to folks that podcast from other localities, other places in the country, I always, try to preface it as I, Wyoming's kind of a small place, and, there aren't that many people that live here, if you hadn't noticed, and 350,000 downloads, that's a huge number. And recently, there have been a lot of milestones for the program, not just the download number, which, it continues to expand, but, being ranked number 33. Oh, did I tell you that? So there's the list of the top 100 conservative podcasts you should be listening to in 2025. And when I broke this story to you, Cowboy State Politics was at number 36. We are now at number 33. I don't know, man. It's an incredible honor, and I am ecstatic to show up on a list with people like Mark Levin, Ted Cruz, Todd Starnes, some of the big radio folks, people that have like syndicated radio shows in America. It's pretty exciting for me. And, just to think that this program started with a cheap Family Dollar microphone and me sitting at my kitchen table with an old computer and not really knowing what I was doing. And if you go back and listen to some of the first episodes of the podcast, you can tell that. But, we've grown, we've improved, we've gotten bigger and better, and it's very, very exciting. So thank you all very much for listening to the show. Without you, I wouldn't really have any reason to do what I do. And thank you to the sponsors of Cowboy State Politics. Your generous support allows me to do all of this. So thank you very much. Now, on this morning's program, I've got a number of different things that cropped up overnight. It never fails. You have a slow and, not a slow news day. Snow news day. It kind of is a snow news day, but you have a slow news day. Nothing's going on, and you're struggling to find stuff to talk about. And then all of a sudden, that evening, there's all sorts of stories. It's almost like, everybody saves up their big pieces for closer to the weekend. So anyway, we got a lot of that today. There was a cache of pipe bombs or different incendiary devices explosive devices that were found around one of the No Kings protests. So not so peaceful after all. Trump, he's had the biggest wage spike since 1969. Since 1969. Holy crap, my friends. And then this is going to come as no shock whatsoever to you. But America, in general, is way more conservative than the people they elect to office. None of us would find that hard to believe, since the Wyoming legislature, though not so much, not to such a great degree anymore, but for a very long time was very, very, a very deep shade of purple. And then the last one, I found this one to be an interesting piece, but I've got a lot of slides to show you. But Democrats really should have to denounce the No Kings rally. I mean, if they are intellectually honest and intellectually consistent, they've got to denounce all of it. And so, and I have some great audio for you. I've got a video from Jim Acosta. You know what? He says you're too stupid to be allowed to vote. We'll get to that later on in the broadcast. Oh, and by the way, the phone lines are open. If you want to call in and be part of the show today, the phone number in the studio is 307-374-8989, 307-374-8989. Since I'm flying solo today, I figured I may as well take you along on the ride. So if you want to be part of the show, just go ahead and give me a call. The number again is 307-374-8989. 8989. I can't wait to talk to you. And other announcements. I mean, God, this morning's podcast, whatever, is just chock full of announcements at the beginning. But I've set up a new email address for the show. It is called theshow@cowboystatepolitics.com. And so any comments you have, any thoughts, anything you want to talk about, and news clips, if you've got a hint for me, or a source, or a tip, or anything, go ahead and send it to that address, theshow@cowboystatepolitics.com. And I just set it up day before yesterday, so it probably hasn't been out there that long. But if there's something that you're interested in, that you want to talk about, go ahead and send it to me. Again, that address is theshow@cowboystatepolitics.com. But we begin this morning with some good economic news, that under the Trump presidency, the very, very young second Trump presidency, blue-collar wages are soaring at the fastest rate since they have in 1969. And this is from the Daily Wire. And I quote, "Wages for blue-collar workers are up more in the first 5 months of President Donald Trump's second term than under any other president since 1969. Quote, "Thanks to POTUS's pro-growth America First policies, real wages for hourly workers are up nearly 2% in the last 5 months of Trump's second term, the strongest growth in 60 years, Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent said in a post on X. Bessent's post includes a graph showing a 1.7% wage growth for blue-collar workers, defined as non-supervisory and production workers during the first 5 months of Trump's second term. The next highest wage growth rate for those workers since 1969 came during Trump's first term, when it hit 1.3% over the first 5 months. No president has ever been able to do that before." And I can show you that graph here. Just give me just a second, and I'll pull it up on the screen. Yeah, flying solo, it's kind of an adventure, because, you got to do all this stuff on your own. But let's see here if I can pull this off. Share screen. All right, hold on just a second. Here we go. So here is the graph, and it's the tweet from Scott Bessent. And you can see since 1969, 0.8% under Nixon. Carter, Carter sucked just about everything. Under Reagan in the first year, and this is to be expected, because, Reagan got credited for a lot of pro-growth policies, but there was a lot of correcting that he had to do from the Carter years once he took office. George H.W. Bush, yeah, kind of a downer. But then you get all the way to the first Trump presidency, and blue-collar wage growth was at 1.3% during his first term, and now we're up at 1.7. So an incredible piece of news for the Trump administration. And for us, really. Let's see here. The rise in wages with blue-collar workers has coincided with the decrease in inflation. And this is probably one of the biggest drivers behind it, because inflation affects it affects everybody. But when the cost of production of goods rises rapidly, well, there's no way that businesses can increase their wages at all. I mean, it just doesn't make any sense. If it's costing more for you to operate, it's better to not increase your wages and just kind of continue on a flat line. And at least that way you can turn a small amount of profit. But if you're increasing wages on one side and you have the increase in the cost of production on the other side, I mean, you're going to be making way less money, if not just falling flat. So it coincided with the decrease in inflation. Earlier this month, the Consumer Price Index for May showed that inflation had stayed somewhere steady since April. The report showed that inflation rose 2.4% last month after rising 2.3% in April. Okay, so remember, inflation is, it's not just, the inflation rate is not just 2.4%. That's the increase from the previous inflation rate. So all of it is cumulative. During the Biden administration, you remember when they would say, well, inflation is down. It only increased 1%. Okay, right. But how much did it increase the month before and the month before that and the month before that? It's cumulative. And remember that inflation is defined as too many dollars chasing too few of goods. So inflation is the amount of money that the federal government has printed and shoved out into the market. And so it drives the cost of everything up. Now, the White House is now pushing the one big beautiful bill to pass through Congress to quote unquote supercharge the economy and provide fresh energy to some of the large scale trends taking place, such as rising wages. Quote, the one big beautiful bill will raise take-home pay between $7,800 and $13,000 for an average family of four. It will increase wages from $6,100 to $11,600 for the average worker, Bissett told Congress during a hearing last week. And, a lot of that is making the Trump tax cuts permanent because it provides certainty in the job market. If employers know what's going to happen year after year, and if you're in business, you don't forecast for 6 months in the future. You don't forecast a year. You try to figure out what business is going to be like a couple of years down the road. That's the only way that you can be successful. And a good example of that is you see a lot of these niche businesses show up. There'll be a trend. Doesn't really matter what it is, whether it's clothing or a new product or a new vehicle. Vehicles a little bit different because those are more durable goods. But anyway, there'll be a new trend, and you'll see a whole bunch of businesses pop up to satisfy that trend. Well, because it is just a niche, and most of those trends are kind of ephemeral, those businesses don't stick around very long because it's very difficult to predict into the future what's going to happen. Now, contrast that with businesses like mine. Okay, so it was pretty easy for me to figure out what was going to happen, in the last couple of years. And I just said, okay, there's going to be a growth in podcasts. This is a medium that just is accessible to everybody. And free speech is one of those cool things that once people realize that there's something new available, you just see an explosion. And now everybody's got a podcast. So what do I do with the program? Well, I have to up my game a little bit. I've got to do things that other people aren't doing, and make it more of a good product. And that's why we put more of an emphasis on the Cowboy State Politics Live, because most people are doing video podcasts. And so that has to be a new way to expand the reach of the program. So that's what we did. You got to do your craft bigger and better than the other guy if you want to stay afloat. So anyway, good news with the economy. It's anytime you see wages go up, that's a good thing. And so, I expect that, things are only going to get better from the Trump administration. Lord knows they're way better than President Biden. Now, remember, we were told that all of these protests, everything that was happening in L.A. was mostly peaceful. And I can't believe they went back to that same old line, by the way. During the George Floyd riots and the BLM riots of 2 years ago, you heard people like CNN and PMSNBC. They would literally be standing in front of a burning building and say, well, most of the protests were peaceful. Mostly peaceful. Not really. There's no fiery exchanges going on. Pay no attention to this burning building behind me. And I think that the American citizens, American conservatives, I mean, just about everybody could look at that and say, that is the dumbest thing they have ever said. Obviously, these things aren't peaceful. Burning buildings, burning cars, people getting hurt, 500 people being arrested. That is not mostly peaceful. But yet, that was the narrative that the media chose to go with for all of these, for the LA riots. They have to try to minimize it because if they were to tell you the truth, that all of these riots were entirely contrived, that they were paid for by a very large group of so-called non-governmental organizations, which, interestingly enough, on a story yesterday, I told you that a lot of these organizations got tax dollars. And then not only are you paying for some of the protesters, you're also paying for the police to protect you from the protesters that you're paying for. I mean, it's a wonderful racket if you can get into it. But it turns out, and this is a piece that showed up this morning from The Blaze, that explosive devices were found at a home of a man arrested near a No Kings protest. And he was allegedly carrying, firearm and ammunition, which, I mean, I really don't care who you are. You can carry your gun. At least in Wyoming, you can. Now, what you do while you're carrying your gun, that's another question entirely. But anyway, this guy was charged with, and this was in Pennsylvania, so they have much stricter gun control laws than we do here in Wyoming. But he was charged with possession of weapons of mass destruction. And I quote, and from The Blaze, police said they found a pipe bomb and other improvised explosive devices at the home of a man who was arrested near a No Kings protest in Westchester, Pennsylvania. Law enforcement searched the home of 31-year-old Kevin Krebs of Conestoga Road in East Whiteland Township on Monday evening and disabled all of the explosives, according to a spokesman with the Westchester Police Department. Quote, I always tell him, you are safe always. You are always being protected. You're never in any harm's way. Officials said initially that the 7 explosives had been found at the home, but later they were told that there was 13 different explosive devices. Krebs had a fully loaded Sig Sauer P320. Good choice of a handgun, by the way. I'm not a big Sig Sauer fan, but that's my personal preference. But they make great firearms. Anyway, he had on him the P320 handgun under a long yellow raincoat, and he was spotted at the protest on Saturday, according to police. He was also found to have ammunition, an M9 bayonet, a pocket knife, pepper spray, a ski mask, and gloves. Investigators said they also found sketches of explosive devices in the home, as well as tactical vests and other items. Krebs was initially released on a $250,000 bond, but he was rearrested and denied bail. He's being held at the Chester County Prison and faces a slew of charges, including 13 counts of weapons of mass destruction. So not exactly mostly peaceful. Thank God none of those devices ended up exploding. But this is the common refrain that we hear from the left, the Democrat Party. Well, I guess that would be to the right. This is to my left. Anyway, the common refrain is, well, they're just protesters. Really, I mean, it's just civil disobedience. They are just demanding a redress of their grievances. Right. If it is a protest on the left, most of the time you should be looking for some sort of violence to erupt. And, I'm not saying it every time, but it seems, and more than seems, it's almost always the truth. When you have these mass protests, which are not organic, they're absolutely pushed by larger leftist organizations. Most of them are Marxist. I went through that on the live program with you. I don't know, maybe it was last week, but anyway, they're not organic, and most of the time they turn violent, or they have professional agitators in there, and it serves as a catalyst to allow crazy people, and this guy Krebs clearly is not in his right state of mind, but it allows people who are mentally unstable to act out. It gives them an avenue. Oh, look, there's a protest. We can go do what we want to do and have some cover while doing it. And it's, And that brings up another topic. Why is it that whenever there's a tragedy, whenever there's a shooting, whenever there's a crazy person that hurts somebody, we immediately go to, some of us immediately try to find out, is he a Democrat or is he a Republican? This is absolutely the case with the guy who was shooting those state legislators. And by the way, that guy needs to go away for a long time. And when it comes to trial, they need to give him the death penalty. Provided that he's able to, that he's, not he's mentally stable enough to go through a trial. But why is it that we almost immediately go to politics? Was he a Democrat or was he a Republican? Well, that's the narrative that's being used. It's almost always used by the left. And I'm not saying the right is immune to this, but we see this almost all the time on the Democrat side, because they try to feed their narrative that these Republicans, they're just right-wing nut jobs and they're crazy, and that's why you have to elect us. Well, first, if you're going to kill innocent human beings, you are already not stable. You are already out of your mind. Clearly, you are not thinking, in any logical sense. And so why then would we try to say, well, he's on the left or he's on the right? I mean, it doesn't really matter whether he's a registered Republican or if he's a registered Democrat. And I'll get to that in just a second. But they're already out of their mind. So really, I mean, you can't trust whatever politics they purport to have. And in Minnesota, and this is another thing, the media went absolutely bonkers trying to say that he was a registered Republican or a registered Democrat. But yesterday on the program, I think it was yesterday, maybe it was the day before, but Ken played for you, Agent 29 played for you this soundbite, proving that the media couldn't tell if this guy was a Republican or was a Democrat, because in Minnesota, they have open primaries and your voter registration doesn't list your party affiliation. Now, later, and I've done a little bit of looking, there's some photographs that you'll see on social media of a guy that looks similar to the suspect with a woman. And the woman has a T-shirt on that says, "I think, therefore I'm a Democrat," which is wonderfully ironic because most of them don't think. But the guy standing next to her sure as heck looks like this shooter. And you'll notice that I'm trying not to mention his name because I don't think we should give him any more credit than he already has. But he looks strikingly, I mean, the guy in that picture looks a heck of a lot like the guy in other pictures. And the reason why Democrats are going out of their way to say, oh, no, it's just, they're just similar. Because they buy into the narrative that if you're on the left or the right and you're one of these crazy people that hurts other innocent citizens, then that somehow is a political point. Well, it is a political point if you're a Democrat. The thing is, though, most people are smart enough to know that if you're going to shoot somebody, if you're going to hurt another individual, then you're already out of your mind and you're already off your rocker. And so it doesn't really matter if you're registered as a Republican or registered as a Democrat. Doesn't really matter. You know, the guy that shot up the baseball game and Steve Scalise was almost killed. Well, that guy was a Bernie Sanders supporter. And, here's the thing, though. When all of this stuff comes out, when we finally get more and more information about these shooters or, would-be bombers like this Krebs guy, most of the time it shows up being that these folks are on the left. But again, remember my first argument, I don't know that this means a whole heck of a lot, because if you're going to hurt people, you're already kind of out of your mind anyway. So I don't think we should put too much stock into any of this. So here's a story that, man, this one I've been waiting since last night to tell you about this. And by the way, I should probably tell you how show prep works. What I do is I finish the show, in the morning, and then I have to, I go do my little things that I have to do. Then when I sit down in the evening, I'm usually on my phone or on my iPad and trying to find articles for the show, and I just send them to the printer. And if I'm on my phone, then I just start creating a list of internet addresses so that I can just go back and look at the articles later. And I just keep piling them up. And then usually about a half hour before the show. I go through them and I just say, okay, I'm going to talk about this one first, this one second. And that's how we get the stack of stuff. And so anyway, this one, I saw this and I was really excited to talk about it. It's from the Washington Free Beacon, and it's entitled, "The Founders Are Weeping. Every Democrat must disavow the No Kings insurrectionists who defiled democracy." Now, remember, we've heard this for, a solid 8 years, that we are desecrating democracy, that we are insurrectionists, that all of us need to be prosecuted for it. Turns out that Democrats must now disavow all of the No Kings insurrectionists who defiled democracy, because what you're seeing in LA is far worse than what happened on January 6th. And if January 6th is an insurrection, as Democrats claim, and for the time being, let's just grant it to them. Okay, so all right, so maybe that fits the definition of insurrection. Then what do the LA riots fit? What what is that? An insurrection cubed? An insurrection times 10? But anyway, if they are opposed to insurrections and insurrectionists in general, then they absolutely have to disavow all of these protests. So from the Washington Free Beacon, and I quote, "Democrats and journalists trembled with rage in 2024 when the New York Times unearthed a photo taken 3 years earlier of an upside-down American flag flying outside the home of Supreme Court Justice Samuel Alito, who said the flag was briefly inverted by his wife in response to a dispute with their neighbor." Now, Justice Alito and his wife they routinely fly different flags outside their house. And when this so-called controversy was going on, one of the big ones that the left freaked out about was George Washington's flag, the one with the white background and the pine tree, and it says, "An appeal to heaven." They claimed that was an insurrectionist flag, that it was, that meant that Samuel Alito, absolutely, and his wife, they're insurrectionists and we shouldn't listen to anything. Now, quote from that piece, "Turning the American flag upside down is a symbol of emergency and distress, first used as a military SOS," the New York Times reporter Jody Cantor wrote. "In recent decades, it has increasingly been used as a political protest symbol, a controversial one because the flag code and military tradition require the paramount symbol of the United States to be treated with respect." CNN's Brian Stelter called it a jaw-dropping story. PMS-NBC's Joe Scarborough said that it was, quote, "just disgusting." Alito was ridiculed as an insurrectionist. Many liberals insisted that his refusal to denounce his wife and disavow the inverted flag was a sign that our cherished democracy was on the brink of collapse. And for once, my friends, I absolutely agree with them, at least right now. They were right. It is a symbol of an insurrection, and I don't see any reason why we should look at it any differently. Let me just show you a couple of other insurrectionists that the left should absolutely denounce right now. I see no reason why we shouldn't. So, for example, here's this one. Yes. Now, this is desecrating the American flag. Without a doubt, it is. You can see the flag is upside down, and they've written on the flag. How more desecrating can you get from our cherished symbol? Let me give you another one here. How about dishonoring the American flag? There's that one. Yeah, somebody in the street holding it upside down. That person needs to be absolutely arrested post haste. So, I don't know, maybe I've got a whole list of all of them. Should we see if there's some more? Let's see, that last one was in Los Angeles. Here's another one from Chicago. This one is abhorrent, and with a sign that says, "We the people." What an insurrectionist type language. That person should absolutely be jailed right now. Let's see if there's some others. Let's see. Oh, in San Francisco. Look at the betrayal. Oh, someone standing up on probably the roof of a car, waving an upside down American flag. And look, there's one in the background, too. How shameful is this one from Philadelphia? Look at all of the upside-down American flags. No kings, no tyrants. How shameful. We should arrest all of those people. And the horror of Detroit. Look at the upside-down flags there. And the hate from Miami. And the subversion in Orlando. And the terrorism in Dallas. Look, my friends, all of these people should absolutely be denounced. And not to mention, it's just not nice anyway. And then there's a disgrace in St. Paul and the abomination in Bangor, Maine. If Democrats have any honesty whatsoever, they should denounce all of this without dispatch. And I don't see any reason why, they wouldn't do it right now, except that they don't want to. It's because they don't mean anything that they say. All of it is just an attempt to get you to vote a different way. That's all that it is, my friends, and there's nothing else that they are after. If Democrats believe that all these people are insurrectionists, then they have to denounce their people too for having an American flag that is upside down. And that kind of calls into question, how many people on the right do you see burning the flag? I'll give you a minute. Maybe I need some Jeopardy music. Do I have Jeopardy music? Hold on just a second. I mean, it's at many, many, many protests, I've seen radicals torching an American flag. It doesn't seem like I have the Jeopardy music out. But I would say that is even worse than holding a flag upside down or even flying one outside. If you have a leftist that's participating in a protest and they're burning an American flag, I mean, that is the ultimate sign of disrespect. And it should be denounced by every Democrat. But of course they won't, because everything that I'm saying is kind of bullcrap anyway. That it's not horror, that it's not disrespect, that it is your freedom of speech to do so, do what you want with the flag. Even though the flag code says that you're to treat the American flag with respect, that it is not to touch the ground, that you're to fold it a certain way, that you're to dispose of it when it gets tattered in a respectful way. But, it is your freedom of speech, unfortunately, to be able to do whatever you want with those flags. So, of course, everything I'm saying here is more satire than anything. But if the Democrats had any intellectual dishonesty among them at all, whatsoever, they would absolutely denounce all of this behavior, and they must do it across the country. I showed you pictures from the left coast to the other left coast of Democrats holding the American flag upside down. Now, this is why every single Democrat politician, and back to the article right now, and Democratic journalist, pardon the redundancy, must immediately denounce the anti-American insurgents who took part in the No Kings riots over the weekend, as pro-American patriots were celebrating the Army's 250th anniversary. Inverted flags were spotted at nearly every so-called protest across the country. Given that none of the perpetrators appear to have been denounced or disavowed by their fellow rioters, it stands to reason that all of the roughly 5 million individuals alleged to have participated in the No Kings insurrection are guilty of betraying their country, desecrating their Constitution, and subverting the foundation of our democracy. May God have mercy on their souls. But of course, all of this is satire, used to expose the sophomoric nature of the left's arguments. That the only thing that they really do is grab a hold of something superficial that they think will further their narrative. And that's really what it is. It's a narrative. It's a story. And more often than not, it's a story that's entirely made up and fabricated to convince you of something that just absolutely inherently is not true. Well, let's go ahead and take a break. And when we come back, I've got another piece from the Federalist that, big shocker here, conservatives are more conservative than the people they elect. I know, it's totally shocking, but I'll bring that story to you when we come back. But first, an absolutely outrageous profit timeout. You are listening to Cowboy State Politics Live. You can listen to the program on YouTube, on Facebook, on X, on Rumble, pretty much everywhere. It's almost like I'm omnipresent. If you miss an episode of Cowboy State Politics Live, you can always go to the live replay, which is located at the website, cowboystatepolitics.com, under the live replay button. You can listen to Cowboy State Politics Live every Tuesday through Friday at 8 a.m. You can listen to the Cowboy State Politics podcast anywhere that you get your podcasts. iHeartRadio, iTunes, TuneIn, really any of them will work. But the easiest place is just to go to the website, cowboystatepolitics.com. There you can find all of the shows, as well as any of the articles that I might bring up during the course of a program. That way, if your name is Joe Biden and you can't remember if you had your pudding today, well, I probably can't help you with that, but I can definitely tell you why you should have never ran for president. And now, back to our program. Welcome back to the program, my friends. David Iverson, Cowboy State Politics Live on YouTube, on Facebook, on X, and on Rumble. It's almost like I'm omnipresent, my friends. And don't forget about the Cowboy State Politics podcast. The easiest way to listen to that is just go to the website, cowboystatepolitics.com, or any of your favorite podcasting apps. The truth be told, I have no idea how many different podcast platforms you can find Cowboy State Politics at, but it's a lot. And there's more and more each and every day that I didn't even know existed in the first place. So it's you can find the show pretty much anywhere. And by the way, if you want to be part of the program today, be part of the show, show up on one of those podcast channels. The phone number in the studio is 307-374-8989. I'm going to go ahead and leave the phone lines open the entire show, just in case somebody wants to call in and talk about something. Now, from the Federals, and I know this is going to come as a giant shock to all of us. It's no surprise to me because I've been watching these miscreants in elective office for, well, let's see here, for 5 years. A lot of people have been watching a lot longer than I have, but I've had the show longer than they have, so whatever. But from the Federalist, Americans are more conservative than their representatives in Congress. I know, not exactly a giant news flash, but there's a new study out that actually proves it. From the Federalist, Abigail Nichols, and I quote, "A new study of voting records found that congressional lawmakers are less conservative than the voters they work for in 41 out of the 50 states, according to the Institute for Legislative Analysis." Interestingly enough, I did an interview, I think it's been like 2 years ago now, with the guy who runs the Institute for Legislative Analysis. And those folks used to run CPAC, all of the ratings that the Conservative Political Action Committee puts out. Yep, some of those folks, went to work for this Institute for Legislative Analysis. Quote, "While one may expect the most conservative lawmakers in Congress to represent the deepest red states, the data proves that this is simply not the case," says Ryan McGowan. That's the guy I interviewed 2 years ago, Chief Executive Officer for the Institute of Legislative Analysis. Quote, "A number of mismatches exist between members of Congress and their constituencies around the nation. Of course, this ultimately impacts legislation, especially at a time like now when Republicans have a razor-thin margin. The recent study provides context to help explain why some bills struggle to pass, according to the Institute's president, Fred McGrath. The analysis overlaps a district's political ideology with the political voting patterns of the district's lawmaker to statistically determine if a representative actually votes in tandem with the area that he represents." I'll give you a news flash and kind of what do they call it? A spoiler. Most of the time they don't. Most of the time, these politicians show up at our front door and they say stuff like, yeah, I love my guns. Taxes are too high. It's wrong to kill a baby. I'm conservative and you should vote for me. And because we conservatives are kind of a trusting bunch, we go ahead and fill in that little circle for them. And then they go to our state capitals in Washington, D.C., and they do exactly the opposite of what they told us, because they're now in office and there's nothing you could do to them, at least until the next election. Lawmakers are scored on an A to an F grading scale, earning an A if the more representatives vote for limited government, the higher chance they have receiving an A. The analysis grades representatives on the principles of limited government, though certain social issues in which the limited government correlation varies, such as abortion, were excluded absent any government fiscal or operational implication. Notably, in deep red states, Republicans voted further to the left of their electorates at far higher levels than Republicans in other states. The Institute said in a press release that Republicans from South Dakota, Arkansas, Mississippi, West Virginia, Oklahoma, Louisiana, North Dakota, Nebraska, Alabama, and Kentucky and Idaho scored in the bottom 10 in terms of alignments in their district. Democrats from swing states, Pennsylvania, North Carolina, Michigan, Wisconsin, Minnesota, Georgia, voted more left-leaning compared to their districts. Democrats in deep blue states like New York and California, according to the study, all the Democrat representatives in those states voted no on the SAVE Act, a bill that would require proof of U.S. citizenship when registering to vote. Only 4 representatives from Hawaii, Texas, Maine, and Washington joined the 216 Republicans in voting yes. With 6 Republicans, 4 Democrats, and 1 independent, the study accounted for former Kristen Sinema's voting record, members of the Arizona congressional delegation, and the most conservative voting record relative to their constituents. The top 9 states whose lawmakers voted more conservatively relative to their district are Arizona, Vermont, Wisconsin, Colorado, Montana, Washington, Maryland, Hawaii, and Massachusetts. You notice that Wyoming is not in that list. Don't know if we're just that small, or we don't have that many people, or if it's statistically insignificant. As the Federalist Sean Fleetwood has noted, the misalignment between the GOP and its voters is an issue that has plagued the Republican Party. Now that they've given the reins of power, many congressional Republicans show little interest in actually governing in accordance with the pitch that they made to voters just a few short months ago. That's because they're redcoats, my friends. During election season, they masquerade as patriot-loving people, and then when they get back to their house, a house that they have seized from one of us, our house, they take off their patriot clothes and expose themselves for who they really are, redcoats. And, it is the same in every state. Wyoming is not unique in this whole thing, though I would say that in Wyoming, it's, the electorate here is far more conservative than our elected people. Now, I'm not saying there aren't Democrats here. I would say in reality, the split, it's probably 60-40, 55-45, something like that. But Republicans still have a solid majority. And don't forget that a higher percentage of Republicans voted for Donald Trump in Wyoming than in any other state. But see, and this is the split between national and state politics. Most people don't pay attention to state politics, which is why this program started in the very first place, to try to get your attention and say, hey, look, these people over here are screwing you far worse than the folks in Washington, D.C. And what happens at the state level affects your life to a higher degree than what happens in Washington. The government closest to the people screws with your life more than the rest of them. And, when I started the show, the vast majority of folks in the Wyoming legislature were decidedly liberal, voting with the Democrats an average of 75% of the time. And if you got to the leadership of both the House and the Senate, they voted with the Democrats almost exclusively. And here's the thing. In Wyoming, there's only 8 Democrats in the legislature right now. There's 6 in the House, 2 in the Senate. And yet we find that it is the Democrats who the majority, well, definitely in the Senate, this is the case. The Senate president Bo Beitman and Tim Salazar and Dan Larson voted with the Democrats an average of 55% of the time. And they're supposed to be the most conservative people. Now, right now, the House is different because the Freedom Caucus controls the House, and they have a pretty sizable majority. I mean, it's not a super majority, but it's pretty close. And so that is kind of flipped around. But prior to the 2024 election, or in 2023, 2022, the redcoats really controlled that House, and the average amount of times that, or the percentage that people elected, God, I'm even having trouble getting this out of my mouth here, that elected representatives voted with the Democrats was around 80% of the time. I mean, that's a shocking number. I mean, and the reason for that is people don't pay attention. They vote for the people that they know. Oh, yeah, I like that guy. He's a really nice guy. You should vote for him. Well, don't vote for somebody because you're friends with them. Take them to lunch. Go have dinner with them. Don't vote for them. Vote for somebody that actually has principles that they can prove that they have, not just because they say it. I mean, there's Johnson County, where I grew up, perfect example, Barry Crago, Poison Barry Crago. I never heard the word conservative so many times than being around that guy. And he votes with the Democrats 78% of the time, or at least that was the last session when he was in the House. I don't quite have the numbers put together for this past session yet. It's because they're not all out yet. But definitely not conservative, definitely the opposite. And yet when he comes home, man, he's the rancher. He's the cowboy hat wearing conservative. He loves his guns. And the truth is, he is the furthest thing from a conservative. So I guess the point in this story is you've really got to understand and you've got to know these people who are representing you, because I guarantee that you are far more conservative than they are. So vet them. Ask them questions. Make sure that they answer them. Ask them the hard ones, right? I mean, tell me how you're going to lower my taxes. And if they give you some wishy-washy answer, then don't vote for him. Go find the other guy and see if he's, more conservative. And unfortunately, here in Sheridan County, with the exception of Bo Beitman, who turned out to be a redcoat big time, voting with Tara Nethercott and the Democrats almost half the time. He's not conservative. He made it. I mean, I could go on for hours about that guy. But with the exception of him, we have pretty good representation in Sheridan County. And there are a lot of counties that have some good representatives. Gillette, there's a lot of good people from Gillette. And actually, there's a couple of folks, in Cheyenne that are good, good, solid conservatives. So anyway, know who you're voting for, because I guarantee that you are far more conservative than they are. And so you got to make an educated decision. Turns out that 75% of the illegal immigrants that have been arrested by ICE are convicted criminals. 3/4 of them are convicted criminals. Now, we've been told that ICE is just snatching people up in the middle of the night. They're jackbooted thugs, and they show up with a van dressed in black, and they just disappear you, and no one will ever know that you were there. Again, that's kind of the narrative that the Democrats want you to believe, but the truth is that these are convicted criminals that have been led into this country by the Biden administration, and in some cases, and in Wyoming, this is true as well, in some cases protected by local authorities. And I quote McLaughlin, and this is from justthenews.com. McLaughlin criticized the media for biased coverage of the ICE raids. She said that the Trump administration was getting the worst of the worst out of this country. Homeland Security Assistant Secretary Tricia McLaughlin said Tuesday, and that's they run a polling outfit, by the way, that 75% of the individuals Immigration and Customs Enforcement have arrested were convicted criminals. Quote, I'd love to remind the American people in the legacy media that actually 75% of the ICE arrests in the last 100 days under President Trump have been convicted criminal illegal aliens, McLaughlin told Just the News. She said that the Trump administration was getting the worst of the worst out of the country. Last week, anti-ICE riots broke out across Los Angeles after immigration raids took place, resulting in Trump having to call the National Guard. On Sunday, he doubled down on his stance and ordered ICE to use all of its resources to deliver the single largest mass deportation program in history. McLaughlin criticized the media for the biased coverage of these raids. Quote, "We had a case out of New York where this Jamaican man who's been in the country for 30 years was deported," she said. "What the New York Times failed to report is that he was in a U.S. prison for 15 of those 30 years for kidnapping. These are the worst of the worst. They are criminals by virtue of them being in the country illegally, and when they come here, they are again engaged in criminal activity. They are prosecuted, convicted, and they are deported, and then they come back. And these are the folks, many of the folks, 75% of them, that ICE and Homeland Security are getting the heck out of our country. This is not, a passel of Maryland men who, by the way, that guy's back here, probably not too happy that he is because now he's facing more charges. Hey, Democrats, all those people that are online in Wyoming, are you radicals that, you don't have your real name on there? He's not a Maryland man. He's a convicted criminal. MS-13 gangbanger. Get it through your head. And he definitely doesn't deserve to be in this country. Well, let's go ahead and take another break before I get to this ridiculous federal holiday. And, it's Juneteenth. I don't even really know what that is. But apparently it's a federal holiday now. Banks are closed. Whatever. I mean, this is just made up stuff. It's like Kwanzaa. It's a made up holiday. The Democrats will never stop. It's identity politics with them all the way. But we'll talk about it next.
U.S. Coin Capital, we hear from Americans across the United States who have a growing concern about the future purchasing power of U.S. paper money. Many Americans are looking for an alternative for long-term capital. For more than 35 years, the people at U.S. Coin Capital have educated American investors on how to properly accumulate United States gold and silver coins. Call us at 1-800-878-2646 or visit us on the web, uscoincapital.com.
Make sure that you subscribe and follow the Cowboy State Politics podcast. You can do that from the website, cowboystatepolitics.com, or anywhere that you get your podcasts. That way, you'll make sure that you won't miss a single episode of Cowboy State Politics.
Some say standing up for what you believe in is being extreme. Ask any woman in Wyoming. They'll tell you this is called courage. The mainstream media claims that holding the line on important issues is being unreasonable. My mom taught me this is called staying true to our principles. In other places, people argue you always have to compromise to get something done. Here in Wyoming, we know that some things are worth protecting at all costs. Some say it's time we give up on the values that made our state great to accommodate toxic culture. I say it's time to stand tall and protect the values that have served Wyoming well for over 134 years. Join Honor Wyoming as we defend and preserve the Wyoming way of life. Find out how you can make a difference today.
Visit honorwyoming.org. Welcome back to the program, my friends. David Iverson, Cowboy State Politics Live, having more fun than anybody should be legally allowed to have. documented to be almost always right 99% of the time. And yeah, that's a record that, no other media source could even come close to. Most of the time they just lie to you and expect you to believe it. Did you see that Karen Reed was found not guilty yesterday? And I don't even get into this type of stuff. It doesn't really interest me too much. But recently, I say recently, but the last year or so, the lovely Christine and I have become, obsessed is a strong word, big fans. We've become big fans of the Crime Junkie podcast. We like our real crime. And this case, they kind of made a big deal about it on that podcast. Now, and if you hadn't heard, Karen Reed, she was, accused of murder, killing her boyfriend. The first trial ended in a mistrial, and then they refiled charges, and now she's been found not guilty from the Blaze. And I quote, "The high-profile case against Karen Reed is over after a jury found her not guilty of killing her police officer boyfriend, though jurors found her guilty on a far lesser charge. The 45-year-old expressed relief to the crowd of supporters outside the Norfolk County Superior Court after jurors deliberated for at least 22 hours in the emotional case. Reed was accused of second-degree murder and manslaughter in the death of John O'Keefe, a Boston police officer, in 2022. On the night of his death, she dropped him off at a party in the home of a fellow officer. Prosecutors said that Reed ran him over with her SUV before driving away and leaving him for dead in the snow. Reed and her attorneys claimed that O'Keefe was beaten to death inside the home and that his bodyguard dragged him out into the street in order to frame her. A separate jury hearing the case had declared a deadlock, and that trial ended in a mistrial. A different special prosecutor in the second trial lowered the number of witnesses who provided testimony in the case. Now, the jury didn't find that there was enough evidence to pronounce Reed guilty of drunken. They did find that there was enough evidence to pronounce her guilty of drunken driving. Reed could have faced a life sentence in prison for the murder charge, but instead, she's only going to serve a year of probation for the DUI. This one here, after listening to all the podcasts and watching the media circus around it, again, normally I don't get into this type of stuff, but this one, and let me tell you why, because Karen Reed was kind of a celebrity, I guess some sort of TV star or something long time ago. But, it sounded like there was a frame-up job. May have been a frame-up job, but really, when it comes down to it, the prosecution, if they had the case in the bag, they really fumbled the ball. I mean, this trial went on for a really long time, and it's just like OJ. It was totally the prosecution's fault that OJ got off, and OJ had some pretty good attorneys, Johnny Cochran and Robert Shapiro, but that doesn't mean that the prosecution gets away on a free pass here. Because if you got that much evidence, you are the one that's fumbling the ball. And, this is the way our system works. And whether you think Karen Reed is guilty or not, it's kind of immaterial. I mean, you can believe what you want, but our system said that she's not guilty. Didn't say that she was innocent, said that she was not guilty. In other words, prosecution couldn't prove their case beyond a reasonable doubt. And if you think that's a travesty, it was Benjamin Franklin who said that it is better that 100 guilty people go free than one innocent man spend one day in jail. That's how our system is set up, that the bar is super, super high, and it's the government's job to prove you are guilty because in America, you're innocent until proven guilty, and I wouldn't have it any other way. Ridiculous former television star Karen Reed, or whatever she was. She's some sort of formerly semi-important celebrity. I don't really care who she is. I just find the case interesting and the media circus surrounding it. And anyway, she's got a DUI to deal with, which is far better than being in prison for murder. Pretty sure she wouldn't have liked that one. So today is Juneteenth, and it's a contrived holiday that is it bears a lot of resemblance to Kwanzaa. Kwanzaa is a made-up holiday, too. But Juneteenth was a federal holiday that was passed when the Democrats controlled Congress, and you had that bumbling geriatric in the White House. And so now it's a federal holiday, and as unless I'm entirely mistaken, banks are closed. And I mean, but I agree with this piece in the Blaze, and it's entitled "Why I Won't Celebrate Juneteenth as a Federal Holiday." First of all, because it's made up, and I'm not going to participate in the Democrats' attempts to create fake holidays and to try to draw attention to a cause that we could deal with as a nation. It just stokes division. And I mean, it's like giving special rights to different groups. It's no different than slave reparations and all of that business. Though I think I do have an article about that somewhere in the stack of stuff. But anyway, from the Blaze, Wade Miller, and I quote, "Expect a wave of corporate media pieces today, all aiming to elevate Juneteenth's importance in the American consciousness. These articles are sanctimonious, astroturfed exercises in progressive virtue signaling." Couldn't have said it better myself, which is why I brought this article to you. "Gaslighting the public into believing Juneteenth deserves equal or even greater recognition than the 4th of July. But Juneteenth neither marks the beginning of slavery nor its end. Activists have hijacked the holiday to undermine the moral clarity that is Independence Day. Juneteenth has been weaponized to fracture America's identity through deception and denigration. It commemorates the day Union General Gordon Granger arrived in Texas on June 19, 1865, to enforce the Emancipation Proclamation and declare the end of slavery in the state. Early celebrations called it Jubilee Day, marking the delayed but welcome fulfillment of the Constitution's promise and the Declaration's revolutionary spirit, at least in Texas. For decades, Juneteenth remained a Texas tradition. It held official statues as a status as a state holiday for 41 years, and an unofficial one since 1866. But in recent years, radical activists have repurposed it as a tool to advance a radicalist rewrite of American history. So just to be clear, Juneteenth was the day that Gordon Granger shows up and he says, hey, the president signed the Emancipation Proclamation. So I guess Juneteenth really is a celebration of the delay in the news media, in the ineffectiveness of the news media. Before George Floyd's death, and here's why this whole thing irritates the crap out of me. It really is a George Floyd holiday. Right around the same time, it was radical activists hijacking anything that they could get their hands on to draw your attention to things that weren't exactly real. But here's what the Blaze says. Before George Floyd's death in 2020, few progressives were even aware of Juneteenth's existence. But after Black Lives Matter led riots that caused over $1.5 billion in property damage and left 20 people dead, the left seized on the cultural moment. Activists bullied lawmakers into submission, both figuratively and literally. That year, members of Congress knelt in kente cloth as a gesture of obedience. The Pentagon renamed military bases to satisfy the new moral order. Corporations slapped critical theory slogans on products. The so-called Black National Anthem was played at sporting events, eclipsing the actual national anthem. And just on a side note, if you watched the program yesterday, I told you how the New York Mets replaced the American flag with a pride flag, on the Jumbotron when they were singing the national anthem. Now I have three favorite baseball teams: the Texas Rangers, anybody who beats the Yankees, and now anybody who beats the New York Mets. But then, my friends, the crowning virtue signal, the creation of a new federal holiday. Juneteenth became the woke sacrament, signaling America's supposedly unending racism. It was ludicrous then, and it's borderline insane now. It's not a real holiday. Unless, of course, you're in Texas, in which case, maybe it is. But the only reason they celebrated is they finally found out that Lincoln signed the Emancipation Proclamation. Maybe what we should do is be saying, hey, Texas, why weren't you paying attention to what happened? Why weren't you reading the newspapers? I'm sure it was in the national press that Lincoln had signed that. But instead, we create a fake holiday because some guy showed up in town and said, hey, you're all free. Lincoln signed the Emancipation Proclamation, which, if you were paying attention, you would have noted anyway. Texas has every right to honor June 3rd. June 19th, the holiday that commemorates the fulfillment of America's founding ideals and the abolition of one of humanity's most enduring evils. There's no question about that part of it. But beyond Texas, it holds absolutely zero national significance. None. There is nothing about Juneteenth that means anything in the state of Wyoming or in Virginia or in Pennsylvania or in Minnesota, North Dakota, or Idaho. Is specific to Texas. This is not a national holiday. Juneteenth doesn't fall on the date of the Emancipation Proclamation. It doesn't mark the actual end of slavery in the U.S. Now, activists howl in protest, but the truth remains. Juneteenth has been repurposed to challenge and eventually replace Independence Day. Mark my words, my friends, this is exactly what the left is up to, because, of course, we can't celebrate Independence Day because, those evil founders of ours, they were slave owners, and, we can't celebrate what they did in this country according to the 1619. I can't even finish this part of the monologue. It irritates me so much. But all of this is predicated on bullcrap rewriting of history. That's exactly what it is. This country was not founded on slavery. It is not a slave country. It is not founded on racism. In fact, it is founded on exactly the opposite. Now, were there slaves? Yes, there were. But our founders were brilliant in setting up a system to get rid of it. The truth is, but at the signing of the Declaration of Independence and at the signing of the Constitution, they had to have enough people on board. And so those people who claim that the Declaration of Independence is a slave document are sorely mistaken. You should actually go read the first draft of the Declaration of Independence that was written by Thomas Jefferson. The biggest portion of it, the biggest paragraph, is all about slavery. And he's very, very explicit when he's talking about it. And actually, if I get, maybe during the next break, I'll see if I can find that for you, and I'll read it to you. The Declaration of Independence was changed from its first draft so that the southern states would sign it. If it had been proposed as it was written the first time Thomas Jefferson went through it, with that big, gigantic paragraph talking about slavery, the guys in the South would have never signed it. And that, my friends, would have meant the end to any burgeoning revolution that was about to happen. But instead, they took it out, they revised it, and they said, we will get another crack at this. Then came the Constitution. Now, a lot of uneducated, ignorant leftists try to point to the 3/5 compromise in the Constitution, claiming that that means that the Constitution is a slavery document. It actually means exactly the opposite. Here's how that went down. They were talking about representation in Congress and how you determine all of that. The first idea was that you had to be a property owner. And that if you had more property, then, of course, you had more representation. Now, the guys in the South, they thought this was incredible because they owned a lot of property. They called their slaves property, and they thought, wow, this is great. We're going to have slavery in perpetuity. But really, what they failed to recognize is that the population of the North in the abolitionist states was growing at a faster rate than the population of the South. And pretty soon, it would eclipse the population growth, meaning that if representation of Congress was based on population and not on property, well, then eventually they would have the votes to get rid of it. So the 3/5 compromise came along to say that the slave population represented 3/5 of the population, because if it had been, one person to one person, then it would have been much, much more difficult to get rid of slavery. As it were, though, it was one of the greatest historical time bombs that you've ever seen. And in Article 5, which is interesting, because that's one of the sections of the Constitution that I talk about a lot, it literally says that the only amendment you can't propose is one that outlaws slavery, but before 1808. That was the compromise. Now, remember, 1791 to 1808, not that long at all. The founders knew that eventually we would outlaw slavery, and they set up a system by which we could do it. And it's, again, the Constitution had to pass just like the Declaration of Independence. And it's not like anybody was really complicit. In fact, George Washington called his owning of slaves a stain upon his soul. But here's the problem. We have a tendency to judge history by today's standards. I call it historiography, where you're taking what you think, what you feel, the times we live in, and you judge history by it. Well, if you do that, you come up with different conclusions. You come up with a completely different view of what happened in history. Now, history isn't good or bad. It just is. Now, we can make the claim that, and absolutely, slavery was absolutely one of the most evil things in the history of the world. But it was not unique to America. It's still not unique. There's still slavery that exists. Talking about the Uyghurs in China, there are other places where slavery still exists. But it's not unique to America. But we have to judge the past in terms of what was happening at that time. And this is how you get an originalist interpretation of the Constitution. I can't remember the name of the decision, but there was a decision by the Supreme Court not that long ago that it dealt with the Second Amendment, that any regulations had to comport with our historical treating of firearms. That is, you have to look at the time in which the Second Amendment was written, and does your regulation comport with what was happening then? That's an originalist interpretation of the Constitution. You're judging what was written at the time by the circumstances surrounding, and that's what we have to do with all history. If you're going to inject your own feelings, now you can criticize what happened. I have no problem with that. But if you're trying to explain why events happen, you can't look at your own prejudices. Anyway, you can't take your own prejudices, if that's even a word. I don't know. I'm going to have to look it up now, and judge the past by it, because you're going to come up with an erroneous conclusion. And that's exactly what we're talking about here. Excuse me. So under the Biden administration, back to the article now, some military institutions flew flags calling Juneteenth National Independence Day. Now, don't tell me that it's not the left's intention to replace our Independence Day with Juneteenth, because it had the military doing it. The Department of Defense distributed official guidance using that exact phrase. Nicole Hannah-Jones, she's the architect of the 1619 Project, the apocryphal story written in the New York Times, uses Juneteenth to promote her claim that America's true founding began with the arrival of African slaves, not with the signing of the Declaration. That is absurd. And the truth is, there were two different things going on at the same time. You had Jamestown, in the South, which was a horror show. I mean, there is no question about it, an absolute horror show. And then you had Plymouth. So America, at its founding, at its core, had a decision to make. Are we going to be like the evil slave traders in the South, or are we going to found a nation like the Puritans in the North? And thank God every day that they chose that. They made that choice instead of the other one. And if you look at the Constitution, the way it was written, it is absolutely based on the Bible. There's a lot of Deuteronomy in the Constitution. And I mean, I don't think there's any question. When you look at the society that was created, it was absolutely based on what the Puritans did and not what Nicole Hannah-Jones claims. Our country was not founded on slavery. Now, an interesting part of this, since we're talking about Juneteenth, perhaps we should discuss the first actual legal slave owner in America. His name was Anthony Johnson. Actually, his original name was Antonio Johnson, and he came to this country as an indentured servant. And that was pretty common during the time. I mean, it was around like 1613, 1618, somewhere around there. Anyway, you would get somebody to bring you over here, and then you would be bound to them, and you'd have to work for them for, a certain amount of years. And then once you had fulfilled your indenture, then you were freed. You were given a piece of land, and, it all depended upon what the deal you struck, was. But, a lot of indentured servants were given a chunk of land and a gun and a little bit of money. But that was true with Antonio Johnson. Well, anyway, he finished out the bargain that he had made, and he was working for a tobacco farmer, and he actually became a pretty proficient tobacco farmer. And so he learned how to do that, and then he thought, you know what, this whole indentured servant thing is actually kind of a good deal, and so he got him an indentured servant of his own, and that guy finished out his service and was set free. Now, up in the north, and I can't remember the state, I'll have to look this up, but there was a guy who had 2 indentured servants, and they escaped. It was a white guy and a black guy. Well, they were caught and tried, and the black guy, or the white guy, was given I think it was 7 or 10 more years of indentured servitude, and the black guy was given life, a life indentured servant. So there is your black-white thing, and where it started. Well, Antonio Johnson, he's looking at this and he says, you know what? That would be awesome if I could have a lifelong indentured servant. And so he sued the guy that was free, that had paid his debt to him, and so sued him, and then he lost. So in the lawsuit, the judge said that no, you're not going to have and appreciate you. This is one of the things that happens at the home studio. The studio dogs have to come in for a visit every once in a while. So anyway, so Antonio Johnson, who has now changed his name to Anthony Johnson, much more Western, right? And he sues, and then he sues again, and it's thrown out of court again, and he sues again, and it's thrown out of court again, and then he sues again, and on the 4th or 5th time, I don't remember exactly how many times he took this poor guy to court, the judge ruled in favor of him, that he was going to have an indentured servant for life. Now, Antonio Johnson became the first legal slave owner in America. Now, let me tell you why you probably had never heard that story before. And if you've been listening to Cowboy State Politics for a long time, you've already heard that one. But if you haven't, one of the reasons you don't know about him is that Antonio Johnson was black. The first legal slave owner, and a guy who became enormously wealthy and in the North American slave trade. That's how he made all of his money, through the slave trade and tobacco farming. He became very influential in the South and in the slave trade. But the reason that you probably don't know about him is he was black. Now, people like Nicole Hannah-Jones, they don't mention that because it undercuts their narrative of black on white racism. Because you can't have any exceptions, right? If you're crafting a narrative, if you're trying to convince people of something that's not true, well, then you just you have to have all the facts line up with your narrative. And Antonio Johnson, he is an inconvenient fact for those people on the left. And the truth is that wrong was righted, slavery, that is. And it's not to say that we don't have racists now. There are racists everywhere, but they are in the extreme minority. Most people are not racist at all. And the truth is, it is the left who is trying to convince you and stoke that fire of racism because it fills their narrative, their oppressed versus oppressor, their white versus black narrative, the workers, the proletariat versus the owners. It all is Marxism, and you have to recognize it for what it is, a big giant narrative. And Juneteenth is another part of it. That it is intended only to sow more, further division, and as this author claims, to replace our actual Independence Day. And so, history is important, my friends. You have to know why we're here, why things happen the way that they are, and be curious. Question all of this stuff that comes out in the media and do your own research. Read what they tell you not to read. Read the things that they tell you to read. Read the things you're not supposed to. Read the things that you agree with and disagree with, and then make up your own mind. Don't listen to a word I say. Do your own research and find out what is true for yourself. And that way, and I don't mean your truth versus my truth. I mean, you find out the truth and you do it yourself. That's a much better way of putting it. And, just because today is Juneteenth, which is a totally fake and made up holiday. I know. It was passed by Congress and whatever. I don't want to hear these leftists go on and on about, it still is true. It's a holiday. I can just, and it's Facebook trolls. And that's the stupid arguments you get all the time. But, You're welcome to make a credible argument. Just know what the heck you're talking about. But the guy ends this piece in this way. I lived in Texas for many years. I'll celebrate Juneteenth as a Texas holiday. The end of slavery deserves celebration. I would even support a national holiday that commemorates the abolition of slavery, honestly. The signing of the Emancipation Proclamation, I think that's a much more important thing, even though, it took a long time after that to make everything come to fruition. But I won't join the farce that Juneteenth represents America's independence. Too many Americans gave their lives to preserve our constitutional republic and the revolutionary idea that all men are created equal and endowed by God with unalienable rights. Independence Day remains the foundation of this country. It paved the way for emancipation, the defeat of fascism, and the collapse of communism, and the rise of the most prosperous nation this world has ever known. The radical left understands this. That's why it has targeted Juneteenth as a cultural wedge. Leftists expect Americans to bow to the altar of wokeness and pretend not to notice. And if we object, they call us pro-slavery. I reject that lie. I refuse to bend the knee to a movement that seeks to destroy everything good and true about this country. The stakes are too high, and the truth, my friends, is too important to surrender. That's why this show exists, to tell you the things that the media is not going to tell you. And so coming up, let's see how much time I've got. Okay, so I've got about 40 minutes left in the program, and I've got this big segment planned to tell you who the Shah of Iran is. Most people don't even know that the current Iranian regime only came around in 1979. But I think we need to start it. Let's start at Israel. Let's start at the conflict, and then we'll go to what's happening in Iran. Because I'm telling you, my friends, the Iran prior to the Muslim or the I don't know what you want to call it, the Ayatollahs taking over, was a very, very, very different place. And actually, I've got some pictures from Iran that I'm going to show you when the Shah was in power. It should blow your mind when you compare it to what Iran looks like now, where people are beaten because they're not wearing their hijab correctly, where women can't show their face, where if you're a gay person, you're thrown off of a building. And, all of these activists that are on the left that are advocating for, free Palestine, free Gaza, and they're unwilling to, denounce the atrocities that are coming out of Iran. And, and there's one that I find, and I shouldn't find this funny, but I do. There's a big movement in the country that if it's the LGBTQ alliance with the Palestinians. And really what it is an alliance of Marxists. But the irony comes in when you have a lot of these LGBTQ-centered groups supporting the so-called Palestinian movement. And the reality is, if those same folks in the LGBT lobby were transported all the way over to the Middle East, in many countries, Iran, they'd be fine in Israel proper. But if they were in Gaza under the PLO and under the Palestinians, they'd be thrown off a building. It's been a few years now, but you remember Ahmadinejad, the president of Iran? Now, this is going back several years, but he was doing an interview, and I think it was done at the United Nations. Maybe I'll go look this up. But he was asked how many gay people there were in Iran, and he said, "We don't have any." And of course, everybody in the media thought, "Oh, he's just lying. God, he's just trying to, that doesn't agree with Islam and all of that." Well, the truth is that Ahmadinejad was probably telling the truth, because anytime they find somebody that's gay, they toss them off of a building or they stone them to death. The truth is that this coalition that you see between the Palestinians, the LGBTQ, the socialists, the communists, all of them have joined forces, because when you boil all of those ideologies down, it really is Marxist at its core. It is oppressed versus oppressor, the worker, the proletariat versus the bourgeoisie. You have to have a manichaeistic worldview. And all of those, like the Muslim Brotherhood, the Islamists, the communists, the socialists, the Marxists, the fascists, all of them see the world in the same way, which is why you're seeing these weird coalitions pop up, the LGBTQ activists. And make no mistake, they are Marxist at their core, that you have to agree with them or they'll destroy you. Think about how many people in the past, I don't know, 4 or actually it's probably more like 8 years, because I started Cowboy State Politics around the time of that Parler. Remember the social media platform Parler? So I started the program only a couple of months before they were deplatformed, and there was a lot of canceling. I mean, if you would say the wrong thing, COVID was happening. It was fascinating. If I did an episode and I said the word COVID or vaccine, there'd be a notice pop up on it. I didn't even have to put it in the show notes or anything. I could just mention it in passing, and that would pop up. But there was a lot of canceling going on. And from a lot of these groups, that if you don't bend a knee to the LGBTQ ZXPWD lobby, then you were canceled. How dare you hate gays? There were so many people that got canceled and in many ways their lives destroyed because they refused to bend a knee to this ideology. So it's agree with us or we'll destroy you. Well, I mean, that's very much in the Marxist mentality. And so, and think about all these Palestinian rioters that we've seen across the country in the last, before Donald Trump was elected and after at colleges and universities. Think about it, right? If you don't agree with them, well, they're going to riot and they're going to beat you up and they're going to storm buildings and they're going to be very, very violent. So it's agree with them or be destroyed. Very, very Marxist. And even though a lot of these different organizations and movements have differences in their ideology and their purposes, they do have one thing in common, that most of them are Marxist. And I mean, it's the same sort of ideology. I mean, it's like a different crayon out of the same box, I guess you would put it. So from the Washington Free Beacon, and I mean, I got way off topic talking about Israel and Iran. But from the Washington Free Beacon, poll finds an overwhelming support for Israeli strikes and for Trump's response among the MAGA base. And I quote, President Donald Trump's voters overwhelmingly support Israel's military campaign against Iran, according to a new poll that found 83% of those voters support strikes on Tehran's nuclear program, and 95% approve of Trump as the president rallies behind the Jewish state. A Gray House poll conducted shortly after Israel began its war effort shows that 67% of those who voted for Trump strongly support the attack on Tehran's nuclear facilities, while another 16% say they somewhat approve. Trump's approval among MAGA voters has risen since he lent his support to the Israeli operation. 75% say they strongly approve of the president's job performance, while another 20% say they somewhat approve. Those results are slightly better for Trump than his approval ratings just a few days before Israel's campaign. When a League of American Workers poll conducted from June 9th to 11th put Trump's approval rating at 88% among his own voters. Now, the results show a little daylight between Trump and his supporters across America, even as prominent Republican isolationist voices like Tucker Carlson publicly break with the president. Trump signaled on Tuesday afternoon that the U.S. is likely to join the fight, saying in a Truth Social post, quote, "We now have complete and total control over in the skies over Iran." Quote, President Trump has handled this perfectly, and that's why his approval rating is at record highs, Senator Tom Cotton told the Free Beacon. Republican voters are united with Trump to support Israel's campaign to end the Iran nuclear threat. Now, there's more daylight, however, when we start asking the question of whether or not the U.S. should be involved. And this one is hard. Generally speaking, Americans are favorable when the president says we have to go to war. Americans rally and we get behind him. But it's the poll numbers are not as good of their support of Israel doing it. Now, I mean, there's some question. We talked about this yesterday on the program. But, it's poll numbers look good, and you shouldn't go to war based on poll numbers, right? You should go to war on principle, which I think is absolutely we would absolutely be in the right there. I mean, Iran is the chief sponsor of terror across the world. They repeatedly say death to Israel, death to the great Satan. Where's the great Satan, by the way? And I have no idea why liberals and Democrats will not take these folks at their word. I mean, if somebody says they're going to kill you, I think that you should probably pay attention to that. And that's what Iran has been doing. They've been lying about their nuclear program. And I think everybody pretty much agrees we cannot allow Iran to have a nuclear weapon. If they get a nuclear weapon, what will happen is they will bomb Israel, and then they will bomb the United States. I mean, that is a foregone conclusion. I don't think there's any really any question there. But, when we're talking about, and, the public support for it, I still think that generally speaking, Americans are in support of President Trump. And I think when they realize that he's made the right decision, they'll be, whatever decision that he makes, they'll be in the right. Now, there's some of the news reports, and I saw them, this morning saying that, well, it's only the U.S. that can, get to the last nuclear facility. And here's why. It's buried deep underground, and the bomb, and everything I've read said the bomb required to get to that nuclear facility is a bunker buster. But Israel does not possess an aircraft that is capable of transporting that bomb. It's too big. Only the new stealth fighter can transport it. So that is the linchpin right there. Not to say that Israel can't figure out something else to go after that facility. It's buried too far underground for them to get it with conventional weapons. Or conventional bombs, I should say, not bunker busters. I don't mean to interject any sort of like nuke talk into this. So here I'm going to take this conversation in sort of a different direction. And that is, what was Iran like before the Ayatollah and the mullahs took over? It was a very different country. In many ways, it was a much freer country. And so we're going to take a quick break. And when I come back, I'm going to show you how that country has changed, show you what's changed. And I've actually got some pretty cool pictures, I think, from Iran pre-1979, show you what it looked like, or at least in some ways. And then I'll tell you who the Shah of Iran is, and we'll do that next. But first, an exposition of pure capitalism on Cowboy state politics. It's spring-ish in Wyoming. Well, what that means for the uninitiated is that it's going to be 70 degrees one day and then snow 1.5 feet the next. And really, if you don't like those two options, just wait a little bit. The weather will change. I know, it sounds a little stressful, but really you should put your mind at ease and buy a pair of socks from the Buffalo Wool Company. They'll keep you warm and dry even on the nastiest, coldest spring-ish day, and they'll keep you cool and dry even when it's 75 and sunny. To get you a pair, go to their website, thebuffalowoolco.com. Trust me, you're not going to be disappointed. Are you one of those people that said something like this before Trump became president?
I have a house in Spain that is going to be ready right after the election.
Siberia.
Nova Scotia.
I'm definitely moving to Canada.
Straight to hell. Iceland.
France.
Asia's pretty cool.
And has the past 5 weeks just been more than you could bear? If that's the case, you have come to the right place. All you need to do is call my friend Rebecca Bextel at Compass Real Estate. She has her fingers on the pulse of the real estate market all across the state of Wyoming. Last year, she sold around $30 million worth of property. Everything from small residential properties all the way up to big giant ranches. So if you've got to get the heck out of Dodge, if you've got to be gone Johnson because you can't stand that Trump is the president, call Rebecca Bextel. Her phone number is 307-699-3519. Let me say that one more time for you in case you missed it. 307-699-3519.
I've never felt the freedom like I do. I feel stronger every day, don't you? Well, I can show you how. A new day, a new way. Watch out, I'm only gonna get stronger. A new day, a new way. Watch out, I'm only gonna get stronger. A new day, a new way. Watch out, I'm only gonna get stronger. A new day, a new way. Watch out, I'm only gonna get stronger. I've never felt the freedom like I do. I feel stronger every day. I'm only gonna get stronger.
Cowboy State Politics is only going to get stronger. The program is only going to continue to expand. 350,000 downloads and counting. Number 33 on the list of the 100 podcasts you should be listening to in 2025. Welcome back to the program, my friends. Cowboy State Politics Live. I'm David Iverson. If you want to be part of the show, the phone number here in the studio is 307-374-8989. Go ahead and give me a call, and we'll talk about whatever's on your mind. Well, so in the last half hour of the show, I want to explain to you what Iran was like before the Ayatollah Khomeini, before 1979. The truth is that actually it was a pretty cool place, and I don't. We have a tendency to forget about the past. You know, our memories are perhaps our collective memory is pretty short. That we tend to only think that things are the way that they are right now. That it's always been that way, because many of us never really had any experience with Iran. Well, I mean, most of us haven't had any experience with Iran directly anyway, but we never knew what Iran looked like before the Ayatollah Khomeini came over or took over, and before the Islamic Revolution in 1979. Now, what most of us probably do remember is that over 400 prisoners were taken at the American embassy. I don't remember the number, but a whole bunch of hostages were taken, and they were held for 444 days at the American embassy. And they were released the day that Ronald Reagan was inaugurated, because Ronald Reagan pretty much said, release them, or the very first thing I'm doing is getting rid of you when I'm inaugurated. So the day of Reagan's inauguration, they were set free. Since that time, Iran has become perhaps the most oppressive Islamic regime in the entire world. They are the chief sponsor of terror worldwide. They support the Houthi rebels, Hamas, Hezbollah, pretty much every terrorist organization that you can think of. They've probably got some lone terrorists in the United States. Thank you, Joe Biden. But before the Ayatollah took over, it was run by this guy named the Shah of Iran. And he was essentially the king of Iran. Well, there's this piece, and it's entitled, Who is Reza Pahlavi, Iran's exiled crown prince, calling for nationwide uprising against Khomeini? And I quote, Reza Pahlavi, Iran's exiled crown prince, called for a nationwide uprising amid escalating Iran-Israel conflict. He claimed the regime is collapsing and urged security forces to defect. Pahlavi blamed Khomeini for dragging Iran into war and pledged a democratic transition, rejecting chaos fears. He resides near Washington and supports reform. Let's see here. Pahlavi's latest message came after he blamed Khomeini for having dragged Iran into the war with Israel. Okay, here we go. And I put this whole thing together, and it's kind of cut and pasted with some other stuff. But he's the eldest son of Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, the last Shah of Iran, and Farah Pahlavi. And he was born in Tehran and named the crown prince under Iran's pro-Western monarchy. Now, at the time that the Shah was in power, they were very much pro-U.S. They were pro-Western values. And you know what? Actually, let's just go ahead and let me show you what Iran kind of looked like when the Shah was in power. And I'm telling you, this is going to kind of blow your mind. Let's see here if I can. I wonder if it's this one. No. Let's just find that. Nope. Wrong one. Okay, get rid of that. Hold on. And Agent 29 needs to needs to get back to work here. I'm having a heck of a time running this show on my own here. But let's try this again. Here we go. And it's got to be... Oh, wait a minute. But it's that one. Yeah, here we go. All right. So this is my X feed. And let me just play this little video for you. There's sound to it, but I've muted it. So just take a picture or take a look at these pictures from Iran. Isn't that amazing? It's going kind of fast, but look at it. I mean, absolutely incredible, right? And here in a minute, it's going to switch to what, here we go. Here's what it looks like now. Yeah. That's the woman who was beaten because she wasn't wearing her hijab correctly. So anyway, it's a pretty good comparison of what Iran looked like before and what it kind of looks like now. And, there's absolutely no comparison. So following his father's death on July 27th of 1980, Reza Pahlavi declared himself Reza Shah II, though he no longer actively seeks to restore the monarchy. Instead, living in exile near Washington, he advocates for a secular, democratic Iran and uses his royal lineage to support that movement. Israel, once an ally of the Shah's regime, now views the Islamic Republic as an existential threat. Pahlavi, however, has maintained positive relations with Israel and visited the country 2 years ago. Iran, now they've long been the source of international conflict between Russia and the West, predating even the name Iran. Persia, as it was then known, was a source of conflict between Russia and England in the 1700s, and both countries expanded their reach through colonialization. Though Iran is physically close to the Russian border, it is also very close to India, one of the British Empire's most important colonies. So now the Shah, he governed Iran from 1953 through 1979 as a secular, though authoritarian ruler. The Shah rose to power after his father was forced to step down, and the Shah's relationship with the U.S. flourished over that time. His government grew increasingly pro-Western as it thought to modernize the country and burnish its international image. However, as the Shah's relationship with the U.S. strengthened and his international profile grew, many of his own people grew displeased with the leadership. And in 1978, riots and demonstrations broke out across the country. And by 1979, these protests increased in frequency, power, and violence. Of particular concern to the protesters were two things they perceived to be linked: the Shah's lack of emphasis on religious values, and his government's close relationship with the U.S. This kind of ended up being a gigantic protest, and I mean it would have to be because the Shah was overthrown. But as turmoil across the country and the pressure on the Shah increased, he lost much of his power, and the U.S. support diminished. The Shah left Iran in January of 1979, and the country soon declared an Islamic Republic by the Ayatollah Khomeini. And previously... Oh, thank goodness for the sneeze button. Anyway, previously exiled opponent of the Shah, the Ayatollah took over Iran as the religious leader and centralized power even further. Very quickly, Iran had changed from one of the U.S.'s most powerful and prominent allies in the Middle East to an openly anti-American, but still very oil-rich country. Initially, following the revolution in 1979, the U.S. sought to normalize relations with Iran as quickly as possible. The U.S. was desperate to regain that ally in the Middle East and to reassert its power. However, the new ruler, who had come to power suddenly and on an anti-Western and very fundamentalist Islamic platform, the relationship was transformed and continued to deteriorate. Then, on November 4th of 1979, fundamentalist and anti-imperialist group called the Muslim Followers of the Line of the Imam symbolized the end of cordial diplomacy when 53 hostages were taken, and though the group, made up mostly of young revolutionaries, was somewhat radical, the government and general public in Iran supported their actions. The taking of the hostages galvanized religious fundamentalists and anti-imperialists in Iran and largely improved the Ayatollah's image in the eyes. And again, those hostages were released on Reagan's inauguration day. And so we're kind of at the same spot, though Iran has been responsible for a lot of terrorism directed at Israel and at the United States. There's the barracks bombings, and I mean the list goes on and on of the a number of Americans that Iran has killed. And I think I saw a report while I was preparing for this segment that some 600 Americans have been killed by the nation of Iran, or that we can trace to Iran. And so it's they have been an enemy of the United States since the Iranian Revolution in 1979. And in my opinion, probably the best thing, and I think I saw a report that this has actually happened, the best thing that Elon Musk could do, if he hasn't done it already, is to turn on Starlink. You see, the Ayatollah cut off internet communications when the attack from Israel started. And the reason why that's important is if you can't communicate over the internet, and you definitely don't want to use a telephone in Iran. But if you can't communicate over the internet, well, then you can't organize. And if you can't organize, and just let me give you an example. So in LA, there were a lot of reports where protesters were communicating, and so when police when the police would show up, everybody knew where to go. And so you'd get a message saying, hey, the police are going to this street, move to this street, and everybody would move. Well, that's what's necessary in Iran. And right now is the perfect time for the people of Iran to overthrow the Ayatollah. And they could have done it during the Barack Obama administration, but he ignored them. All over Iran, there were signs that said, please help us, Mr. President. And he didn't say a word about it. All he would have had to do is say, we support the Green Revolution. That's what it was called in Iran during Obama's administration. We support the Green Revolution. And it would have propelled that revolution, and they probably would have overthrown the Ayatollah. But that's what needs to happen now. Elon Musk, turn on Starlink, and pretty much all he's got to do is flip the switch and turn it on, and then the Iranian people can take over, because the Islamic Republic, it has been probably one of the largest human rights violations in the world. And the truth is, we probably don't even know the extent of it, but it is a fundamentalist Islamic regime, and they're one of the more brutal ones. So anyway, the best thing that can happen is that the people overthrow the government, and we get back to, I'm not saying the Shah needs to be in charge, but he certainly has some influence. And if he's willing, then absolutely he should help in any way that he possibly can to move that country to, a more democratic country. Well, speaking of people that don't really like the way the world is going, Jim Acosta. Now, he doesn't think that that farmers are capable of thinking for themselves when they're voting. It's absolutely true. And this one, I believe, is from the Daily Mail. Anyway, and I quote, former CNN host Jim Acosta claimed on Tuesday that farmers are being led astray in voting for far-right candidates in U.S. elections because, they're just too stupid. And let me just, I've got a little video of Jim Acosta. And again, this one, you can see my entire screen because I couldn't make the video any bigger. But take a listen to this.
The far right in this country has kind of figured out a way to infiltrate, the heartland and to, basically pull, mom and pop from the farm to their point of view. And as it turns out, a lot of those folks vote in these elections. And a lot of those folks have been completely led astray. I hate to say it, but they've just been completely led astray. And we've all just let this happen on our watch with essentially a business model for delivering the news in this country that just does not work anymore.
Oh, so these people are just too darn stupid to make choices for themselves. Now, you probably couldn't see it in the video, but he's speaking at the Center for American Progress. The Hillary Clinton, God, what? And I always forget the guy's name, the lawyer. Anyway, the Center for American Progress is one of the more prominent leftist organizations in America. It's funded by George Soros. And it is, for Jim Acosta, the former CNN anchor, disgraced anchor, to be saying that you're too dumb and you've been led astray by voting for all of these right-wing extremists. This is the same thing that the media in Wyoming is trying to tell you. that all these people that you put into office, they are nothing more than right-wing extremists, and you're just too dumb to be making up your own mind. I mean, it is, and I don't understand why they can't figure it out, why you elected so many conservatives in the state. And actually, it's pretty easy, because you're tired of all the left-wing spending, all the left-wing politics, all the left-wing abuses of your liberty, being told that if you don't bend a knee to the woke agenda, your life is going to be destroyed, being told what kind of light bulb you have to put in your house. And here's the reason. You ever notice, I'm sure you do, but I use that example a lot, and here's why. Because, we used to be a country that it didn't really matter what you did behind your closed door, that you have the liberty to make the decisions to run your house however you want to. But the Biden administration, and frankly, the Barack Obama administration, they wanted to control every aspect of your life. And that's the only way that they can effect socialism, by the way, is through control, because essentially that's what it is. But they had to make all of your everyday decisions for you. What kind of light bulb you can screw into the light socket in your house, what kind of fridge you can buy, what kind of car you can drive. But it's all about control, because liberty for them is extraordinarily dangerous. Simply because eventually, and all their plans don't work in the real world. That's the number one thing that Democrats, and I don't understand why they don't possess the necessary critical thinking skills to look at what their party is proposing and to question why those things don't actually work in the real world. And I don't think that, and for them, it's probably all just about power. And, a lot of people ask me, hey, why did Senator Beitman and Senator Salazar sell us out to the Redcoats? Well, because power does weird things to people. And once you get any sort of modicum of power, if you are not a principled individual, well, you want more power. And if you are one of those people who is a socialist or a communist or a Marxist, I should start using the term Marxist. Well, the essential component of all of that is total control. You have to have control over what people do, because if you don't, there will be dissension. And look at all the socialist communist regimes that have ever existed. And they never worked, by the way. They always lead to mass murder and death. But the only way that they kind of worked is through control. That you have to be able to control the message through the media. You can't have religion. You can't have free speech, because if you have any of those things, people will start to discover that your plans fundamentally don't work in the real world. And the problem with Democrats, and this is sometimes why I think that they suffer from some sort of mental condition, is because they don't think critically about what they're proposing. And, there are some reasonable Democrats. If you listen to the podcast, I interviewed Democrat Representative Trey Sherwood. And frankly, I think it's a fantastic interview. But it clearly shows you the difference in thinking between conservatives and Democrats. And, a lot of their ideas are just fundamentally flawed. Like I asked Representative Sherwood, so where is it in the Constitution that we have to provide somebody an affordable house? And she says, well, it's a social contract. No, it isn't. No, it isn't. The only contract we have is called the Constitution. Well, it's, the pursuit of happiness. Well, that's in the preamble. That's not in the Constitution. And each individual's pursuit of happiness is up to the individual. That's how this country was based. But you see the flawed thinking. Even the examples that she used. We were talking about affordable housing and taxes. And she says, well, when I give my money to my church, I don't have any say over how they use that money. Okay, a church is private. Government is not private. The only way the government has money is if it takes it from you. And when you get far enough down the Democrat road, those taxes, they're always confiscatory, but then they become burdensome because, the socialism, as Margaret Thatcher once said, socialism only works as long as you have other people's money to spend. And the only way that you can get people on board with your agenda is if you keep giving them free stuff. And that's the seductive lure that the Democrats use. Vote for us, we'll give you more free stuff. Vote for us, we'll do this. Vote for us, we'll do that. And that's where Obamacare came from. And really, And that's why I say, we should just start using the term Marxism for all of these folks. But it doesn't work. It's never worked. And, if Democrats had critical thinking skills, they wouldn't be Democrats, because their policies and their plans never work in the real world. Well, I mean, they work up until they run out of other people's money. But after that, I mean, they fail miserably. Let's see here. Let's kind of end on a, we were talking about the Middle East a little bit, and we have a Somali citizen. I guess she's a U.S. citizen now, but she is from Somalia. She said that America, and keep in mind, she's an elected representative of the United States of America, or of her state, Minnesota. And she said that America is one of the worst countries. Take a listen to this. And I mean, this shouldn't come as any surprise, but these are the people that are, are in the Democrat Party, that are entirely Marxist, that are absolutely out for, your money and your liberty. And don't think that I'm exaggerating that, because I'm not. Essentially, that is what they are after. You can't be left to make decisions for yourself. They have to make it for you. But listen to what she thinks about America. Listen to this.
I grew up in a dictatorship. And I don't even remember ever witnessing anything like that. To have a democracy, a beacon of hope for the world to now be turned into one of the worst countries where the military are in our streets without any regard for people's constitutional rights.
One of the worst countries without regard to anyone's constitutional rights. Oh my God, my friends. She is one of the people that is in Congress. And if you want to know, and thankfully she doesn't have, as much influence as she could. She still kind of, commands kind of an audience, because there's a bunch of radicals in the Democrat Party. But just think about that, right? So she is in the United States Congress, and she says that the U.S. is one of the worst countries in the world. Just because the National Guard was dispatched to Los Angeles to quell a riot, which, by the way, that's happened a lot in our history. Several presidents have used the National Guard. Since we're talking about Los Angeles, the last time there were mass riots in L.A., yes, it was George W. Bush who sent in the National Guard to calm the riots down. So that doesn't make us one of the worst countries in the world. It doesn't make us a dictatorship. It certainly doesn't make us Somalia. But this is the type of crap that you're hearing out of the U.S. Congress. Now, let me give you one more. Well, you know what? We've pretty much at the end of today's program. So I think I'm going to save this next part for tomorrow on Open Line Friday. So make sure that you don't miss an episode of Cowboy State Politics Live or the podcast. You can watch the show every Tuesday through Friday from 8 to 10 a.m. And tomorrow is Open Line Friday. And, I had the phone lines open all day today. But I'll try to do some promoing today and see if we can get some people to call into the show. So tomorrow, Open Line Friday, we're going to talk about what you want to talk about, whatever it is. Hopefully we get some more calls. I guess that'll do it for today. Make sure that you don't miss an episode. And by the way, leave me a review. Every time you listen to Cowboy State Politics, leave me a 5-star review. It keeps the program up in all the algorithms and keeps the program growing. So thank you for listening, my friends. Have a good rest of your day, and we'll talk again tomorrow. From the base of the Bighorns, I'm David Iverson. This is Cowboy State Politics. See you tomorrow, my friends.